Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Funner. We are in season 3, where we continue our mission to redefine leadership one amazing story at a time. The Executives Lounge is more than just a podcast. It's a movement. At its core, leadership is about impacting and influencing for the greater good. And this season dives deep into how leaders are making a difference in their communities across the globe. Let's get started. All right. Put you over just a tad so I can read what I wrote. All right. Today's guest is someone who has redefined what it means to truly listen, not just to others, but to ourselves too, and what goes unsaid in every conversation. Oscar Trimboli is the award-winning host of the Deep Listening podcast, and he's the author of How to Listen: Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication. His work isn't just about hearing words, which is why I'm so excited to have him on today. People are actually really bad at listening. In fact, within 10 minutes of this podcast episode, you'll start losing focus. And by the end, if you're lucky, you'll remember about 25% of it. Oscar is asking us to really look at how to create spaces where people feel seen, heard, and understood. And man, does that resonate with the work that we do here on this podcast. So I also wanted to mention, as someone who's researching how toxic leadership erodes women leaders' sense of safety, belonging, and esteem, as I was reading through Oscar's book, his message really resonated deeply with me. In listening to the stories of these women in toxic environments and listening to how the listening actually breaks down or is non-existent when we're talking about toxicity in the workplace, conversations tend to be navigated from survival instead of a space of love, care, and thrive. And so Oscar's framework shows us that listening itself can be an act of restoration of our dignity, of our agency, and of our psychological safety. And so, Oscar, welcome to the conversation, and I'm excited to see where we can take this today.
Thanks, Christine. Really looking forward to listening to your questions today.
Absolutely. So the first step here is you have kind of 5 components of the listening framework, if you will. Can you share those so we can use them as a foundation for where we might go?
Yeah, first I want to acknowledge the 35,000 people in our research database who all contributed to this. This isn't something that I've waved a magic pen on a whiteboard and come up with. This is the result of asking people what they struggle with when it comes to listening and many other questions. But that's the fundamental question that gives us 5 levels of listening. The 5 levels of listening are: first, listening to yourself; next, listening to the content. And those first 2 levels, we're listening to things. So we're listening to ourselves and we're listening to the content. And then at levels 3, 4, and 5, we're listening for things. We're listening for context, for the unsaid, and for their meaning. So if you just want to put it in words: yourself, content, context, unsaid, and meaning. And it's all progressive. It is very difficult to listen to somebody else if you haven't taken the time to listen to yourself. It's very difficult to listen for what's unsaid if you don't understand the context in which it comes through, etc. So they're the 5 levels of listening. If you want to unpack each of those, I'm happy to, but I'm curious what that sparked for you.
Yeah, well,
For those of you who are listening who couldn't see, Christine said, "Oh, just read the book," or you could listen to the book, depending on your preference as well.
The thing that, it sparked a lot in me, from a linguistics and semantics standpoint. My undergraduate work and my work in K-12 education spent a lot of time in language acquisition and what the meaning of language and meaning of words, the semantics of words is. And so it struck me just from the basics, that if we're not even speaking the same language, or the words that we're using don't mean the same thing to us, to listen is actually really difficult. And so that was one piece that really stuck out to me, is when we're listening, we're listening from our lens. And that,
Yeah.
and I think because of that, we tend to listen to respond, because we can listen from our lens and then respond. It could be cultural too.
Yes, it could be both. I think for leaders who are listening right now, and for those who work with leaders, a simple example of what perspective are you communicating through? A leader is often obsessed with the future. They're often looking forward. They're often looking to bring about change. Others may not. Others may just be in the past. They need acknowledgement. They need to be heard before they can move forward to this bright, shiny future that the leader's espousing. So that fundamental disconnect that often I see is as people and leaders try and bring about change in organizations or change for an individual, they're obsessed with talking about change in the future and what's going to be great. And yet they haven't taken the time to acknowledge where the person's at, what that person needs to say, what it means to that person, what they've contributed already, because then they'll be ready to move forward. So, a simple lens of listening is time.
Mm,
And most people don't realize that even the way we discuss or dialogue, time is a really good signal about where the conversation is disconnected at. So, for leaders out there, you probably need to have more funeral than fanfare in your change initiative. You need to take the time to thank and acknowledge people and the contribution they've made to bring the organization, the team, the group to where we are today so we can move forward before they're ever ready to move forward. So, time is a really simple orientation. Others that we don't think about in language is me, we, us. A
mm,
lot of
mhm,
people will be either speaking from their personal perspective or a team perspective or an organizational perspective, and the other person may be having a different perspective. So acknowledging that, or problem versus solution.
mm,
Leaders are often obsessed with going forward. Are they going forward with the right problem? So there's
mhm.
some really basic workplace context where
Yeah.
language constructs create dissonance in the dialogue.
Well, and time too. I think, I was working on this last week with the group, where I was sharing design thinking. And in design thinking, we as humans really tend to only ideate for about 8 minutes before we jump to solution. And I argue, in design thinking, we want the creative, innovative brainstorming to continue for as long as possible, because you want to exhaust all possibilities and have fun doing it. And typically, when you only ideate for 5 to 8 minutes, you're leaving a lot of possibilities on the table. And I think you're speaking to that too, in terms of that, of this context of time, that we are always so fast paced and go, go, go. And we're so quick to get to solution, that we don't slow it down and think about the fact that 8 minutes to a solution seems real short-sighted to me.
Yeah. And this obsession to drive a car really fast down a one-way street or a dead-end alley means you have to reverse out and go backwards to go forwards again. And when people understand the most basic of neuroscience when it comes to listening and speaking, you'll understand why taking a bit of time at the beginning will multiply, and it'll multiply the impact, it'll reduce rework, it'll help people to come up with different or alternate ideas. And when it comes to listening, most people kind of get obsessed about the listener. That's interesting, but it's not helpful. So if we spend a bit of time with the speaker, because the listening communication is a simultaneous equation, we listen and speak at the same conversation. Our roles shift in a very short period of time. And even when we're speaking, we need to be listening. And when we're listening, we need to be speaking. So for the speaker, when we understand this very rudimentary set of numbers, they can speak at about 125 to 150 words per minute. Yet on average, they can think at 900. That means the first thing they say is 14% of what they think. Or said another way, if all you do is listen for what's said, you're missing 86% of what they think and what they mean. And that in a group setting is not multiplied, it's actually squared. So the problem becomes exponential when you're not listening to all the voices in the room. And a lot of leaders get frustrated with hearing that because, like, my team doesn't speak up. Okay, so what have you done to create that environment? Is a better question to ask rather than my team doesn't speak up. So, and listening doesn't have, in a group setting, doesn't have to be sequential. So we don't
Mhm.
have to take 8 minutes to listen to every individual. There are techniques you can use to listen in parallel, whether they're electronic or manual or dialogue techniques. So, Christine, the most common insight people walk away when they either read the book or do the workshop or the jigsaw puzzle is, wow,
Mhm.
if all I'm doing is focusing on what somebody says, I'm missing a good chunk
Mhm.
of what's important in the conversation. How does that play out for you?
It's so powerful. I love that you bring up the data behind it. Whenever I do a speaking engagement or a workshop, I actually start with a slide that talks about our speaking speed and our thinking speed and our listening speed. I love that you brought that up. What what it makes me think about is we what makes us so fast? What culturally is causing us to rush this process, right? What can we do to slow that process down? And it makes me think about self-regulation and like calmness, right? And I'm wondering how often we walk into conversations almost dysregulated or not calm. And is that what's causing us to rush? I feel like we rush conversations often.
Yeah, I hear a lot of weing, kind of, we do this and we do
Mm,
that, and our cultures do this. And individuals ultimately responsible for the change they want to bring. And high context cultures, cultures that value the relationship as much as the output. So these cultures are cultures like the Inuit of North America, the Native American Indians, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Koreans, the Aboriginal communities of Australia, the Polynesian cultures of the Pacific. In their cultures, silence, pausing, is a sign of wisdom, respect, and authority. And in the working West, again, this rush to be more productive and faster often results in us coming to conversation sounding something like this. Christine, I'm really sorry I'm late. I've just got back-to-back meetings right now, and although I'm 5 minutes late, I'm here now, and let's go. Well, what we know is they're not ready to go. They're not even in the room mentally, whether that's a virtual room or a physical room. So for a lot of leaders out there, and I use that independent of title or hierarchy, we're all leaders if we're trying to
Mhm.
make some kind of change
Absolutely.
in an enterprise or an organization, is why not start every meeting at 5 or 10 after the hour? That you can control. If you're
Mhm.
sending an invitation to somebody, you can do that. And you'll have people generally in a group setting. Some people will arrive on time, some people will be that person I just described. But if you start the meeting at 5 after the hour rather than five
Mhm.
right on the hour, that person who arrives at 5 after the hour, oh, thank goodness, Christine, you start your meeting at 5 after the hour. I've had back-to-back meetings all day today, and I had moment to grab a glass of water, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, have a restroom break. Really looking forward to the conversation. Now both people are arriving at 5 after the hour, but the very simple signal of when the meeting starts is sending a signal about the state you're trying to bring. What's the listening container or the communication container you're trying to create? And a lot of the people I work with just go, wow,
Mhm.
this glorious 5 minute gap I have with your meetings. I sit there and I think we're all adults, and this simple 5 minutes helps everybody to arrive at a state, in a pace, in a mindset that they're ready to be present in the conversation. They're noticing their attention, and whether that's in the meeting or not. Sometimes,
Mhm.
Christine, if we're doing a one on one and the other person arrives frazzled and in that state, maybe that's a really good point in time to reset the meeting time. Maybe now is
Yeah.
not the time for that conversation. So there's many techniques as individuals that we have much more agency than we think to change the listening container or move the listening container or have the conversation while walking or have the conversation in a completely different environment than a predictable one. And all of these elements can combine as ingredients into the recipe you create for the conversation you're going to have. I think it's too easy for all of us to just blame our cultures and our systems and our
Mhm.
workplaces to go, oh, but that's how it gets done here. And we've got less resources than last year than we have this year. It may be true. What responsibility are you taking for yourself to make an adjustment there?
You bring up
Because,
such an important point, right? The important point of the power of the pause. And recognizing where you have agency to make adjustments. I call that 5-minute period the passing period because I used to work in schools. That when you're in school, you have a bell and the bell would ring and you'd have 5 minutes to get to the bathroom, get some water, say hi to your friends, and then head into your next class. And somehow in adulthood, especially as Zoom and these meetings online took off, we just do these back to backs and we've forgotten about the importance of the passing period. I love that you bring that up. I think it also gives opportunity for that breath in for a reset. That just that basic breath in can shift your nervous system around and help ground you back into the present of where you are. And I think those slowing downs and giving space for like basic physical needs also, like going to the bathroom. Have you gone to the bathroom today? Have you walked outside and taken a deep breath of air? Have you gotten a new glass of water, a new cup of tea? I think those simple, basic physiological questions help you find space to be able to listen way better, way
hmm,
better. I want to shift for a minute because one of the pieces when I was reading the book about listening to yourself, really, I wanted to take note of this because when I work with clients or I teach leadership in these spaces of what is present leadership, what is human-based leadership, and how do we cultivate community? I always kind of start with this idea around discernment and having that breath in and breath out to hear yourself first. And I think because of the busyness or because of different cultural aspects of being stretched and pulled, we might forget that. But also from a women's perspective, we've been conditioned to ignore our intuition or ignore the power of our silence because at the table we might be pushed over if we are too quiet. And so I'm just curious from your perspective of all of this experience that you've collected from others, how do we help ourselves step into listening, discernment, intuition, um, groundedness in who we are and what our voice is saying to us?
Look, for many of us, when it comes to listening, we were great listeners when we were born. The first skill you learn
Mm,
when you're inside your mother's womb, at 32 weeks, you could distinguish your mother's voice from any external sound. So the very first skill you learn, even before you're born, is the skill to listen. And it was important for you to listen to the sound of your mother because that's how you're going to get fed. So it's a pretty important thing to learn. A couple of weeks later, you can start to distinguish music from the other murmurs out in the outside world as well. Yet the minute we come into the world, we come in kicking and screaming, literally. That's when you kind of press the watch and go, that's the time they were born, is when they start screaming because we know their lungs are fully formed. And I think for many of us, it's not what have we got to learn, it's what have we got to unlearn. We learn how to listen from our parents. We learn how to listen from our family groups, our workplaces, our schoolyard, our sporting environments, our musical environments. So if you think of archaeologists going through all this sedimentary rock that's built on top of our listening, all of these forces are weighing down on us. And intuition is extraordinarily powerful element in listening when it's used effectively. Yet it has to be noticed that it's available before it can even
mm,
be used. And again, I think if you're the meeting host in a group setting or you're leading a conversation in a one-on-one setting, um, three questions that you may want to add to your kit bag. Um, what do you think? What do you see? What do you feel? For bonus points, you may not use the feel. You may use what do you sense? Because some people may not be able to connect with feel, but they may be able to connect with sense. And you can ask yourself that question. You don't have to wait for someone else to help you with that. Yet, if you've got all these browser tabs open in your head, one open for the next meeting, one open for the last meeting, one open for this meeting, one open to what you have to do when you get home, is punching into working memory. And as these browser tabs get open, your ability to perform, to process is reduced, just like a browser tab on a computer or on a phone or on a tablet. The more tasks you have open, the less productive the device is for you. And the same is true for yourself. So ask yourself this question: how many browser tabs are open right now while I'm
you
listening
don't want to see
to?
mine.
No, I'm
No.
posing that question to those who are listening to
Yeah.
Christine and Oscar right now, and just take the moment to acknowledge them, notice them, maybe leave them open, maybe shut them down, but understand that listening happens in the most modern part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
and working memory is crucial in its function. And it does a lot of what we term executive function or higher level thinking, which is typically what you need to do in your workplace, especially for sense making or designing or collaborating. So just ask yourself,
Mhm.
what do I see? What do I feel? What do I see, sense? These questions are good questions for self reflection before you get into any conversation. And the best time to do it is in that 5 minutes between the last meeting and the next meeting, because you've set up your next meeting at 5 after the hour.
Give yourself the passing period.
Mm.
Um, what are we so afraid of in letting go of so much busyness to be able to really be present and listen? I know that might be an existential question that we can't answer today, but I wonder that what is inhibiting us from listening may be this fear of letting go of all the things just to be present in the one thing. And I wonder what that is. I really do.
Well, when we look at the data from those 35,000 workplace listeners, 62% of people are at level one. They're not even in the conversation. So two-thirds of people that you are in a conversation with are still struggling with listening to themselves. They're still struggling to process the last meeting. They're still dealing with other issues before they're even available in this conversation.
That is
So in
mind-blowing to think about, but we all know it and feel it. I want to stop on that because 62% of us walk into any given conversation not ready because we're barely even listening to ourselves. I
mm,
mean, does that have any connection to this feeling of being unfulfilled, this feeling of anxiety, the feeling of overwhelmedness? Is there correlation to just not being present?
in those two-thirds in that 62% of folks, the common phrases that come up are distraction. The common phrases that come up are back-to-back meetings. The common phrases that come up, short attention span. The common phrases that they talk about is even if I'm present to the dialogue, I can't stay in the dialogue long enough to jump back to those things that I haven't necessarily processed before I get into the conversation. And a lot of people need to understand that you can focus exclusively your attention on something for 12 seconds, which is hilarious because for somebody listening to us right now,
They're already
uh,
gone.
or they may be using some other technique, like they
Mhm.
may be playing the recording at faster speed because
Sure. Or like
you can,
walking on the treadmill, right?
yeah,
Doing something to cross train your brain.
for all of us, it's we can control our own state. That's our responsibility.
And I love this because there are so many people in this community that are redefining leadership and they are working towards cultivating spaces in their communities for true, meaningful, authentic discussions towards human-centered community efforts to accomplish something. And so I love that you are giving some tools and some data points to accomplish what they're really trying to accomplish, which is community-centered work.
Yeah, and just a reminder for all of us that the best listening cultures are the best storytelling cultures, and the best storytelling cultures are the ones that tell stories to their children. So don't underestimate the importance of reading to your children. But in doing so, they're learning how to listen. And the same is true in the workplace. I'm not saying that adults in the workplace are children, although sometimes they may act like it. If you're in a very linear, rational, fact-based environment, it's very difficult for people to make sense of the data without an overarching story. Even an orchestra, that plays in the same venue with the same instruments, with the same conductor every single time, out of professionalism, out of humility, out of respect for the musicians and the orchestra. They tune their instruments before the performance. And there is an equivalent when we come to
Mm.
dialogue, is tuning our body, our mind, and our intuition before the conversation takes place, as a sign of humility, as a sign of professionalism, as a sign of respect for yourself and for the other person.
Oscar, if there was one hope for the work that you've done in collecting and sharing this knowledge, what is the hope?
My wish is simply that people start to move from listening to what's said and start to notice what's not said. My hope is that in exploring not the 86% that's unsaid, but just another 14%, go from 14% to 28%, that more alternatives will emerge. My invitation to you is sometimes your most potent thinking by that sense, by that
Mm.
intuition. And the earlier you share it with the group, you can change the conversation because you're listening from a completely different perspective than the other participants.
Mhm. I think each person has to step into the discomfort a little bit. That if I'm a verbalizer and I'm an extrovert and I'm speaking loudly, but I also need to step into the discomfort of the silence and maybe pull some of those thinkers in. And similarly, if I'm a processor, a thinker, a contextualizer, I might have to find myself in discomfort and push in a little earlier than I normally would to let people know I'm also part of the conversation.
Yeah, and the sign of great leadership or great dialogue is the flexibility to know what the situation requires rather than what you require.
Oscar, I want to thank you for your time today. This has been a really reflective, poignant conversation around your book, How to Listen, and the research that has gone into it, and a lot of the thoughtfulness that has gone into how to share this information with us so we can have deeper connections together through the ways that we listen to each other. And I just want to say thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us today on the Executives Lounge and the latest episode. You can find more information about Christine Fauner at christinefauner.com. And you can find more podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, the website christinefauner.com/podcast, or LinkedIn.